So here's a sentence that stopped me in my tracks. You cannot outperform an identity that doesn't feel worthy of success. You cannot outperform the internal traumas and the internal personal wounds that are showing up in your career. You cannot outperform an identity that was formed from those internal traumas and those internal personal wounds that do not feel worthy of success in your professional life. I mean, in your personal life as well, but for the purpose of this channel, your professional career, your professional life, your work. That sentence gave me so many goosebumps the first time that I heard it. So let's talk about what it means. Let's talk about what it means to heal those internal wounds, those internal blocks that are showing up in your career and that keep holding you back. I don't think many of us realize that without working on those internal wounds, without working on that self-worth, that internal personal part of yourself that you don't think is a factor in your professional life, you'll never be able to reach that full potential in your career. And even reaching career goals will feel like a constant uphill battles filled with a ton of obstacles and a lot of self-sabotage. I mean, even goals that should feel very attainable and very manageable will feel like reach goals to you because you'll keep getting in your own way. So how do we stop doing that? First off, let me explain what I mean by internal wounds and internal traumas that we all have. Those are what I like to call the internal barriers that we have within ourselves that were created by early experiences in our life. They're the coping mechanisms that turn into behavioral patterns or emotional patterns that we actually took with us into our professional world. They're almost like traits that define who we are. Examples of these and how they show up in our professional world would be like imposter syndrome, feeling afraid, feeling insecure, perfectionism, overthinking, overworking, people-pleasing, avoidance. That's how they show up in our professional world. But we have to stop thinking about them like personality traits, like character traits, like they define who we are. They're really just those protective responses that were created because of our early life experiences. And I wouldn't necessarily call them weaknesses. I would call them survival strategies that followed you into adulthood and into your professional career. You can probably start identifying these within yourself. They look like shrinking in meetings, being unable to raise your hand to speak up in a meeting because you're too afraid. You feel small within this room of people that you think are so much greater than you. You overwork and overprepare because you feel like your value or the value of your work is not equitable to the value of your peers. You completely avoid awkward conflicts, difficult conversations, because you cannot stay within that space feeling uncomfortable. You avoid them and you just go with whatever happens as long as you don't have to have that difficult conversation. You're really bad at taking critical feedback. You feel triggered, you feel defensive every time you get any type of critical feedback. It really becomes about your identity every time you receive some sort of critical feedback. Another way is feeling the need to have constant validation. Anything you need, anything you do has to be reviewed by someone, and someone has to give you the okay to do anything you want to do, to make a decision, to send an email. And there's so many other different ways that it shows up in your life. These are just a couple examples. And unknowingly, these are the behaviors that are holding you back in your career. You might be surprised to understand that it's yourself. You are your biggest challenge. You are the biggest factor that is holding you back. I think a lot of us like to say, well, it's because, my boss, or it's because of the project, or I'm not getting the opportunities, or, we like to say that it's all of these external factors that are holding you back, that they're the biggest factor holding you back in your career. Sometimes it can be, but a lot of the times, a lot of these can be overcome through looking internally, through looking at those behavioral patterns that are showing up in your career that you are the only one that can adjust. You're the only one that can recognize them, and you're the only one that can improve them. And changing those patterns starts by recognizing that those patterns aren't about the job at all. They're about those old behaviors stemming from your personal internal wounds that keep showing up in your professional life. So I broke it down into a couple of steps, what I did personally to start changing those patterns in myself. And I think anyone can use these steps because what I find so funny is that they're so simple, but they're really difficult to execute and keep up with consistently. So, step number 1 is building awareness, radical awareness. This is where you're really going to look and start trying to jot down those behavioral patterns. Start noticing the triggers, the repeated behaviors, and write it down. I mean, that's the only way you're going to be able to look at a piece of paper and actually see, when did you feel small? When was it hard for you to speak up? When were you overthinking and overanalyzing something? And what were the triggers? What happened right before that made you repeat that behavioral pattern or made you repeat that pattern? Write down when your reaction was bigger than the situation warranted. Write down when you felt scared, when you felt defensive. And especially write down when your nervous system felt dysregulated. Write down when you started to panic, when you started to feel fear, when your palms started sweating, when you felt nervous and your voice shook. The reason this step is so important is because you cannot heal what you don't know. You cannot heal what you're not aware of. And yes, of course, being aware of it isn't the solution, but it is the first step on moving forward. Step number 2 is going to be to identify the story behind each of those behavioral patterns, behind each of those triggers that you had, behind every time that you felt scared in a meeting, behind every time that you felt imposter syndrome. I want you to start understanding, what is the story behind it? What is the story behind you making a mistake and it making you feel horrible, making it feel like it's part of your identity? Making a mistake makes you feel unworthy, makes you feel like you don't deserve the space that you're in. Write down that narrative that is inside of you that feeds that behavioral pattern, because that's the only way that you're going to start understanding where they come from. Examples of this might be, oh, I made a mistake. I am now disappointed in myself. I feel unworthy because I think they will reject me, because I think they will think that I'm stupid, because I think that they'll tell me that they no longer want to work with me. I have to be perfect because it's the only way that I will feel respected. I can't disappoint people because they'll no longer like me, and then I won't be allowed to take up space. These are the stories that stem from those early experiences. Somewhere in your life, that was the reason that you felt unworthy, because someone made you feel that way, or because the situation made you feel that way, and you developed these survival mechanisms. And now they're showing up at work. Now they're become limiting beliefs in your adulthood, in your professional life. They're what protected you back then, but now they're costing you your career. They're costing you leadership positions. And honestly, they're costing you money because you're unable to gain those ambitious goals in your career as quickly as you'd like to. They're holding you back, and they're holding back your salary. So what do you do next? The next step is to rebuild your self-worth, to provide yourself with new evidence, and start by breaking those patterns, breaking those habits that you've accepted are now part of your personality trait, that you've accepted are who define you now. And the only way to do this is to start executing, to start building new habits, creating action momentum to build new habits, and give yourself new evidence that all of that narrative, that whole story, those whole behavioral patterns are not true. They're not who you are, and they're not your personality traits. They do not define you. So, a great way of doing this is by writing down the exact action that counteracts that behavior that you're trying to stop and that is holding you back in your career. And it's going to seem scary, but we're going to start small. For example, say you feel small in a meeting and it's really hard for you to speak up. Your one behavioral change is going to be saying one thing, just one thing at every single meeting that you attend. One thing other than my name is blank and this is my role. It could be small. It could be a question. It could be a small input. It could be a small comment. And even if you felt like it was invaluable, you're going to sit in that discomfort for a little bit, but you're going to keep repeating that action. Do it prepared. Come to the meeting a little bit prepared with the question. And then eventually it'll become a habit where you start speaking up, and slowly it'll become a habit where you feel confident in what you're saying at every meeting and you're able to speak up more and more and more. If you're trying to go from a contributor role to a leadership role, maybe the first habit is to start taking accountability and ownership of a very small task, somewhere where you have to coordinate with maybe one person and deliver that task by taking ownership of it completely. Other ways could look like starting to set boundaries, starting to say no at least once a week without apologizing, or being able to make decisions without asking for validation. Start small. Send that email without requesting input or requesting that someone read it before you send it out. What we're trying to do here is to prove to yourself, no one else, you first, that that old story is no longer true. That's why we're going to start small, because no one needs to know that you're doing this. You're doing this to prove it to yourself first and change your internal operating system first before you start showing up to your professional world differently so that you can gain those leadership roles that you want or gain that career that you want. You're going to start small so you start breaking those patterns. Start feeling that self-worth. Start feeling confident. And the only way to do that is to train your brain, and your brain learns from repetition. Every single small act of confidence becomes new evidence of the person that you want to become, of the leader that you want to become. Which takes me to my next step, learning how to regulate your nervous system, which is such a little mini superpower that we all can learn to have. You know, I used to get really annoyed when people would tell me, take a breath, calm yourself, think before you speak. That'll help you regulate yourself and help you show up in a more powerful way. And I thought it was such BS. I thought it was such bullshit, but it wasn't. The issue was that I had a dysregulated nervous system, and I didn't understand how people could actually just sit there and if they got triggered, they took a breath and then acted. That didn't happen for me. I was so dysregulated that I would just see red and react. The thing is, you don't even realize that you have a dysregulated nervous system. Mine showed up as anxiety. I couldn't sleep without having the TV on. I mean, I was over preparing to the point of having itineraries to go on vacation. I was unable to sit with my own mind. And I used to overthink every single social interaction. And this is very complex to do. I mean, there's many, many things out there. Yoga, exercise, meditation. I mean, there's even stretches and movements that help regulate your nervous system. But in the professional world, let's try to keep it simple. First off, pause. You can always pause. Give yourself permission to pause. Give yourself permission to take a moment before you respond. This is a power move. People feel your internal regulation. They feel you taking the power to take a moment for yourself before you respond. And it shows you in a very good leadership light. Take a pause before you respond. Take a moment before you respond. If you're in conflict, take a breath. Breathe in, breathe out. I mean, I've literally done that where someone's probably yelling at me and I just look at them and I say, okay. And then I continue, right? Notice when your body tenses. Take a moment to notice and sit in the way your body is tensing up. And when that happens, try to slow down. Slow down your speech. Slow down the way you breathe. Slow down your movements. Again, this is going to show how you're regulating yourself, and people will respond to this. When your body feels safe, when you feel regulated, you make decisions based off facts and based off the situation. You don't make decisions based off of fear, based off reactions, based off of triggers. Doing this makes you feel comfortable in uncomfortable situations, makes you feel confident making decisions. It makes you feel confident in your role, even when things are going terribly wrong. Finally, last step. This is where you start defining who you want to become or who you are internally that you're going to embrace. A lot of us want this leadership role, this career, and we want to be this person that we see in our minds, but we don't actually take the time to define what that is. What kind of leader are you going to be? What kind of person are you going to be in that career, in that ambitious career that you have in your mind? Who's the woman or man that you want to be at work? How do you speak? How do you lead? How do you respond to conflict, and how do you advocate for yourself? Once you're able to explain or define that person within you, then it is so much easier to create that identity shift. But be very careful because you're not trying to become a new person. What we're trying to do is trying to embrace that version of yourself that already lives within yourself, that knows their self-worth, that feels worthy of all of the success that they want, that feels worthy of that career, that ambitious career that they want. So those internal barriers were there to help protect you, but you are allowed to outgrow them. For me, I think I often felt that those quirks, those little behavioral patterns were what made me me. And when I tried to mask them, when I tried to outgrow them, it made me feel like I was being inauthentic, like I was being fake. Like when I showed up confident to a meeting, that was a version of myself that I was making up. That wasn't genuine. But that's not true. I almost had to give myself permission to outgrow that version of myself and embrace or become that different version of me that I saw, that I wrote down, that I defined, that I wanted to be. And you might start noticing that a lot of the people near you will start feeling uncomfortable with that version of you. But that's a topic for a different video. As you start healing these internal barriers, your leadership will become clearer and your decisions will become stronger, and that confidence will be something that you will no longer have to fake. So if you want more videos on identity, leadership, and self-worth at work, please subscribe. We are just getting started. I hope you enjoyed this video. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye, everyone.